You know, you start looking at the guys, God almighty, he's handsome, he's tall, he looks good, he can sing, he can play.
What really happened when Elvis Presley stepped into the shadows of Memphis's segregated clubs? For decades, B.B. King kept a massive secret about how the king of rock and roll truly treated him. And now that the truth is out, fans are absolutely furious. Join us as we uncover this shocking confession. Beale Street Shadows. Back in 1952, Memphis, Tennessee, was a city divided by unfair rules called Jim Crow laws. These laws legally separated black people and white people in almost every part of daily life. They could not use the same restrooms, sit in the same sections of restaurants, or live in the same neighborhoods. The city had strict physical and cultural boundaries that everyone was expected to follow. If you broke these rules, you could get into serious trouble with the law. But on Beale Street, inside a music venue named Club Handy, things were different. The club operated as a rare sanctuary where those harsh social boundaries seemed to disappear. Inside its doors, people cared more about the sound of the music than the color of someone's skin. On any given midnight, the air inside Club Handy was warm and thick with cigarette smoke. Bright neon lights glowed through the haze, casting a colorful light over the crowded room. On stage, B.B. King and his band played with incredible energy, their bodies sweating under the stage lights as they pushed through another intense midnight set. The guitars seemed to cry out, creating a deep blues melody that filled the space above the constant chatter of the audience and the sound of clinking drinking glasses. On this specific night, there was a sincere observer standing near the entrance. An impoverished, unknown teenager named Elvis Aaron Presley was lingering quietly in the deep shadows of the all-black venue. He did not have much money, his clothes looked worn, and he did not legally belong inside the club because of the segregation laws. Yet, he stayed because he was completely captivated by the performance. Elvis watched the stage with intense focus. He closely studied the way B.B. King bent the metal guitar strings to create those emotional crying notes. He also paid close attention to King's vocal patterns, carefully watching how the musician breathed between his words to deliver each line with maximum feeling. Elvis was not there to cause trouble. He just wanted to fully absorb the true spirit of the blues. So, what happened when this quiet, intense teenager finally stepped out of the shadows to speak to B.B. King face to face? The outsider's eyes. When B.B. King's music set finally came to an end, the quiet young teenager did not run away. Instead, he waited patiently for the right moment and walked straight up to the blues musician. He was nervous, and his movements were a little awkward, but he showed a lot of bravery by approaching the stage. He looked directly at the legendary guitar player and said a line that changed everything. "Sir, I don't want to steal it. I just want to feel it." At first, B.B. King just laughed, because it was a surprising thing for a young white kid to say in a segregated club. But as King looked closely at him, he recognized that the boy was completely sincere. He could see the genuine honesty in his eyes. King decided right then and there to keep an eye on this skinny kid from Tupelo, Mississippi. He wanted to make sure the young man stayed safe, while exploring a world that society said he should not be visiting. King felt a deep personal empathy for the way Elvis listened to the music so intensely. It reminded King of his own youth when he used to stand outside church doors, listening carefully to catch the rhythm of religious songs that he was still trying to understand. Because of this shared experience, King understood exactly why Elvis was searching so hard for the spirit behind the sounds. To King, this specific sound was much more than just notes on a guitar. He believed that the music was a direct reflection of many different worlds crashing together. It was a unique mix where the lives of the rich and the poor, black people and white people, church choirs, and late-night juke joints all met in the same place. Elvis wanted to understand that exact mix. King knew that if you wanted to play this music correctly, you had to study the deep feelings and the history behind it, rather than just copying individual guitar chords. He saw that Elvis was willing to do that difficult emotional work. Next, we will look at how Elvis took these deep lessons and turned them into a massive radio hit that shook the entire country. Crown Electric Nights. After finishing his long daytime shifts driving a delivery truck for Crown Electric, Elvis Presley developed a strict nightly routine. He would head straight down to Beale Street, completely drawn to the music that filled the night air. Because of the strict segregation laws in 1953, he was legally forbidden from walking inside most of the black music clubs. Instead of going home, he chose to hang around outside the buildings. He would sit quietly on the concrete curbs right next to the streets, leaning close to the doors and windows. From the sidewalk, he would hum along with the blues melodies that drifted out from the bands playing inside. He spent hours in the dark, completely focused on the sounds he was not supposed to be hearing. B.B. King noticed this behavior and realized it was a blueprint of true obsession. King knew that white boys during that time did not come to Beale Street out of casual curiosity. The social risks were far too high, and the racial dividing lines were too intense. For a young man to repeatedly risk his safety just to sit on a curb meant he possessed a deep, unstoppable need to experience the music. It was not a passing hobby, it was a total dedication to learning the blues. This obsession also brought Elvis to the studios of WDIA, which was the historic all-black radio station in Memphis, where King worked as a popular radio DJ. Elvis would slip into the building quietly and find a place to stand completely out of the way. He would stand alone in the physical corners of the studio rooms, gently closing his eyes while the records spun on the turntables. He did not talk much or interrupt the workers. He just stood still, soaking in the underlying rhythm of the songs. He listened to the deep vocal groans, the heavy bass lines, and the patterns of the gospel and blues tracks. By standing in those shadows week after week, Elvis was training his mind and body to fully understand the heartbeat of Memphis music. But what happened when Elvis finally took this hidden rhythm out of the shadows and recorded his very first song at Sun Records? That's all right. One afternoon, B.B. King was driving his car down a highway when a brand new song started playing over the radio. It was Elvis Presley singing his very first commercial record, a track called That's All Right. The music hit King with such a sudden intensity that he had to pull his car completely over to the side of the road. He sat on the highway shoulder in absolute shock, listening closely to the speakers. King immediately recognized the unique sound coming through the radio waves. It was the exact music from the busy streets of Memphis, but it was all tangled up together in one single voice. He could hear the rough grit of the Mississippi Delta blues, the emotional cries of traditional black church gospel music, and the fast tempo of white country music. Elvis had managed to unify all of these different cultural elements into a single record. The release of that specific song caused an overnight explosion of success for Sun Records, the small local studio where Elvis had recorded the music. The entire music business changed almost instantly because of this breakout hit. Suddenly, the powerful people who ran the major record labels began to realize that this new style of music could make a massive amount of money. However, this commercial success created a deeply complicated situation. For decades, black musicians had been making this exact style of music, but society unfairly labeled their work as race records and refused to play it on mainstream radio stations. Now, the very same radio stations and music buyers were spending millions of dollars to buy the sound from a young white artist. King watched as the deep emotional pain of his community was turned into valuable commercial property. As Elvis became famous, many music critics began writing that this young man had actually invented rock and roll music from scratch. King always disagreed with that statement, offering his own clear historical perspective. King famously stated that Elvis did not invent the blues, but he introduced it to a much larger audience that had never been allowed to hear it before. But how did the two men handle this complicated fame when they met again in secret at an after-hours club? Union Avenue Secrets. One afternoon, B.B. King was driving his car down a highway when a brand new song came on the radio. It was Elvis Presley singing his very first commercial record, called That's All Right. The music hit King with such sudden intensity that he had to pull his car over to the side of the road. He sat on the highway shoulder in complete shock, listening to the speakers. King immediately recognized the sound. It was the exact music from the streets of Memphis, but it was all tangled up together in one single voice. He could hear the rough grit of the Mississippi Delta, the emotional cries of church gospel music, and the fast tempo of country music. Elvis had managed to unify all of these different cultural elements into a single record. The release of that song caused an overnight explosion for Sun Records, the small studio where Elvis recorded it. The music business changed almost instantly. Suddenly, the powerful people who ran the major record labels began to realize that this new style of music could make a massive amount of money. However, this commercial success created a complicated situation. For decades, black musicians had been making this exact style of music, but society labeled it as race records and refused to play it on mainstream radio stations. Now, the very same radio stations and music buyers were spending millions of dollars to buy the sound from a white artist. King watched as the deep emotional pain of his community was turned into valuable commercial property. As Elvis became famous, many music critics began writing that this young man had actually invented rock and roll music from scratch. King always disagreed with that statement. King explained that Elvis did not create the style out of nothing. Instead, King offered his own clear historical perspective on the situation, famously stating that Elvis did not invent the blues, but he introduced it to a much larger audience that had never been allowed to hear it before. But how did Elvis handle this massive wave of fame when the two musicians met secretly in an after-hours club behind Graceland's gates? By the year 1957, the city of Memphis was experiencing a deep and intense cultural divide. As Elvis Presley's fame grew larger, the public began to split along strict color lines regarding who actually owned his music. Many white fans claimed Elvis entirely as their own hero, while many black musicians and community members watched his success with a mixture of sadness and frustration, wondering if their own musical history was being completely erased by the music industry. During this tense time, B.B. King stood up as a lonely defender of the young star. When hostile music journalists questioned Elvis's intentions and accused him of simply stealing black culture, King spoke out to defend him. King looked at the journalists and explained that the public did not understand the truth about the young man's heart, famously stating that Elvis loved the blues before it was safe to love the blues. King wanted people to know that Elvis had risked his own safety on segregated streets long before he ever made a single dollar from singing. Hoping to find a safe space away from the constant noise and growing public anger, Elvis reached out to King in 1957 and invited him to his new home, Graceland. King accepted the invitation, slipping past the large iron gates to meet his friend in the absolute privacy of the mansion's music room. Away from the flashing cameras of reporters, and the pressure of screaming crowds. The two men spent hours together, trading personal stories about the old days on Beale Street. Inside that room, the meeting turned into a quiet, private masterclass. Elvis dropped his confident stage persona and asked King a series of deeply vulnerable questions about the mechanics of music. He wanted to know exactly how to make a song breathe, asking how a singer could slow down a rhythm to let the audience feel the spaces between the notes. Elvis also asked King to explain the precise dividing line between making loud noise and creating a deep, authentic feeling on stage. He was terrified of becoming a fake performer who just went through the motions to please a crowd. King sat patiently with him, explaining that true blues music cannot be faked because it requires you to be completely honest about your own internal pain. Elvis listened to every word with intense seriousness, proving to King that he still cared about the spiritual truth of the music more than the massive fame surrounding him. But as the two men sat talking into the late hours of the night, King began to notice some deeply worrying signs written across Elvis's face. Squeezing the soul. By the year 1957, the historic city of Memphis was experiencing a deep, tense, and intense cultural divide that shook the local community. As Elvis Presley's global fame grew larger and more powerful, the general public began to split along strict color lines regarding who actually owned his revolutionary music. Many enthusiastic white fans claimed Elvis entirely as their own newfound hero, using his image to represent their generation. At the same time, many local black musicians and community members watched his massive financial success with a painful mixture of deep sadness and growing frustration. They looked at the radio charts and wondered if their own rich musical history, struggles, and artistic creations were being completely erased by a greedy music industry that favored white faces over the black artists who built the genre. During this incredibly tense and volatile time, B.B. King courageously stood up as a lonely, vocal defender of the young rock and roll star. When hostile music journalists and angry cultural critics repeatedly questioned Elvis's true intentions, openly accusing him of simply stealing and copying black culture for easy money, King used his own platform to actively defend him. King looked directly at those skeptical journalists and explained that the general public did not understand the true, honest reality about the young man's heart. He famously stated to the press that Elvis loved the blues before it was safe to love the blues. King desperately wanted people to know that Elvis had routinely risked his own physical safety on heavily segregated streets, sitting on curbs outside dangerous venues, long before he ever made a single dollar from singing or signed a major contract. Hoping to find a genuinely safe space away from the constant public noise, media scrutiny, and growing racial anger of the city, Elvis personally reached out to King in 1957. He extended a private invitation for King to visit his brand new home, the Graceland Mansion. King graciously accepted the invitation, quietly slipping past the large iron gates to meet his friend in the absolute privacy of the mansion's quiet music room. Away from the flashing cameras of aggressive reporters and the heavy pressure of screaming crowds, the two men spent hours together trading personal stories, laughing about the old days on Beale Street, and sharing their mutual love for rhythm and blues. Inside the quiet walls of that room, their casual meeting quickly turned into a serious, private musical masterclass. Elvis completely dropped his confident, hip-shaking stage persona and asked King a series of deeply vulnerable, honest questions about the hidden mechanics of music. He wanted to know exactly how to make a slow song breathe, asking how a singer could masterfully slow down a fast rhythm to let the audience feel the emotional spaces between the individual notes. Elvis also asked King to explain the precise dividing line between making loud, empty noise and creating a deep, authentic feeling on stage. He confessed that he was terrified of becoming a fake performer who just went through mechanical motions to please a crowd. King sat patiently with him, explaining that true blues music cannot be faked because it requires a person to be completely honest about their own internal pain. Elvis listened to every single word with intense seriousness, proving to King that he still cared about the spiritual truth of the music more than the massive fame surrounding him. But as the two men sat talking into the late hours of the night, King began to notice some deeply worrying signs of physical and mental exhaustion written across Elvis's young face. What exactly did King see in his friend's eyes that night? And what urgent warning did he try to give him before it was too late? Drowning in gold. As the years rolled on, the two musicians traveled down completely divergent roads, moving further away from the shared Memphis streets of their youth. Elvis Presley was swallowed up by the massive Hollywood movie machine, filming endless musical comedies, and was eventually trapped in the blinding glare of commercial isolation during his long Las Vegas concert residencies. He was constantly surrounded by a large entourage of bodyguards, aggressive business managers, and screaming fans, yet behind the scenes, he was completely alone. He lived his daily life inside shuttered luxury hotels and highly guarded mansions, hidden entirely away from the realities of the real world. Meanwhile, B.B. King remained on the endless highway, choosing a completely different lifestyle. He spent his entire life touring constantly on buses, playing his authentic blues music in smaller, uncompromised juke joints, city clubs, and local music halls across the country. His crowds were much smaller than Elvis's massive stadium audiences, but King's music remained completely raw, real, and under his own artistic control. By staying on the road and playing small venues, King was able to stay deeply connected to the everyday struggles, joys, and stories of real people. Years later, these two distinctly different paths crossed one last time during their final backstage meeting. When King walked into the quiet dressing room to visit, he did not see a powerful, confident superstar. Instead, he saw a tired, broken man who looked deeply unhappy and worn out by his lifestyle. Elvis hugged King tightly like a true brother, sat down heavily into a chair, and had a heartbreaking emotional breakdown right in front of him. He looked down at the floor, shook his head, and told King, "I can't even hear myself anymore. I don't feel like a man anymore, just a brand name." The aggressive music business had completely turned a human being into a commercial product. During this intense conversation, King realized that Elvis was trapped by a deep, hidden sense of internal guilt and an imaginary debt to the original black musicians who had created the blues. Elvis felt that he owed the entire world too much because he had received all the massive wealth, trophies, and global fame for a unique musical sound that he had simply learned from others on Beale Street. He felt he could never stop performing or take a break because he had to keep paying off that heavy emotional debt to his demanding fans and his greedy business managers who relied on him for money. Before King left the dressing room that night, Elvis looked at him with intense seriousness and delivered a final parting mandate that King never forgot. "You're still free, BB. Don't ever trade that. Not for anyone." Elvis knew that King's freedom to travel, live a normal life, and play real music on his own terms was worth far more than all the gold records and money in the world. King walked away into the night with a heavy heart, knowing his friend was drowning in the gold of his own success. But how did B.B. King physically react when he received the tragic news that Elvis was suddenly gone forever? The mid-note freeze. On August 16, 1977, B.B. King was performing a live concert inside a packed showroom in Chicago, Illinois. He was in the middle of a song, completely focused on playing his guitar, Lucille, when someone from his crew quietly walked onto the stage. The person leaned in close and whispered the tragic news into King's ear. Elvis Presley was dead at the age of 42. The moment the words registered, King froze completely mid-note. His fingers stopped moving across the guitar strings, and the music cut out abruptly. The showroom went quiet as King stood there in total shock, unable to finish his musical set for the crowd. He felt a deep, overwhelming sadness because he was not entirely surprised by the news. King later explained his sudden reaction, stating that he knew Elvis had been dying long before his heart actually stopped beating. He had seen the heavy physical and emotional toll that fame had taken on his friend during their final private meetings. After that terrible night, King carried a heavy private burden of survival for many years. He felt a deep sense of internal guilt about outliving Presley. It bothered King immensely because both men had emerged from the same red dirt of the American South. They had both grown up in extreme poverty, coming from absolutely nothing, and they had both loved the same style of music. King could not understand why he was allowed to grow old and travel the world, while the young boy from Tupelo was already gone. As King processed his grief, he began to understand the big difference between their two lives. He realized that the blues had played a therapeutic role in saving his own life. When King felt sad, lonely, or stressed, he could stand on a small stage and use the blues to bleed the emotional pain directly out of his body through his guitar notes. The music was a healthy release that kept him grounded and connected to real life. Elvis did not have that same escape. Instead, Elvis was trapped inside the immense toxicity of massive pop fame. King observed that pop fame does not heal a person's underlying emotional pain. It simply hides the pain behind wealth, security guards, and bright stage lights. The larger Elvis grew as a commercial brand, the more isolated he became from the healing power of the music he loved so much. King kept these deep thoughts buried away from reporters for decades, protecting his friend's memory from the media. So, what finally caused B.B. King to break his long silence decades later during an emotional night on stage in Mississippi? Love without peace. In the year 2008, B.B. King was performing an open-air concert under a warm southern sky in Mississippi. This was his home soil, a place filled with deep personal history and people who understood the roots of his music. Somewhere in the middle of his musical set, King took a completely unplanned detour from his regular show. He abruptly stopped pulling the strings of his guitar, Lucille, and let the music fade into total silence. He looked directly out across the quiet crowd, his voice sounding much softer and heavier than usual. He told the audience that he needed to tell them the absolute truth about his old friend, Elvis Presley. The words he spoke next completely stunned the listeners. King leaned into the microphone and said, "Elvis didn't just borrow from us. He believed in us. I watched the world take it from him piece by piece." The audience sat in absolute silence, completely shocked to hear King talk about the rock and roll legend with such raw emotion. King wanted everyone to understand that Elvis was never a cultural thief. He explained that Elvis truly loved black people, respected their struggles, and carried their church prayers inside his voice. King felt a deep sadness because he had watched the greedy music industry treat Elvis like a product, slowly draining the young man's spirit until there was nothing left of the person behind the golden crown. This public confession led to King's ultimate takeaway about the tragic end of Presley's life. He offered a heavy, final definition of what actually caused the superstar's death, looking straight ahead with wet eyes. King told the crowd plain and simple that if anyone wanted to know what really killed Elvis Presley, it was love, but it was a heavy love that had absolutely no internal peace in it. Elvis loved his fans, his family, and the music so much that he completely consumed himself trying to please everyone else, leaving his own soul empty. King also shared that he had spent years dealing with this grief through a recurring dream that visited him at night. In the dream, a young, healthy, and happy Elvis would suddenly walk back onto the stage, laughing out loud and calling out to play one more song together. King would always smile and welcome him back, telling him that he had finally come home to where he belonged. B.B. King's confession reminds us that behind the massive legend of Elvis Presley lay a real man who carried the heavy weight of the blues until it broke him. Some truths aren't meant to divide us, they're meant to heal. If this story touched you, hit that like button, share it with a friend, and subscribe for more untold stories.